habrá que acumular retraso. Entonces,
antes que nada, me dicen que la siguiente charla que estaba prevista aquí se traslada a la otra nave, a la nave Terneras. Entonces se cambia y va a ser Leona, que es viene de Estados Unidos, la que va a hablar
from
después de
the United
nosotros.
States will
Y,
speak
sin
after
embargo, pues,
us here.
trataba,
And the
si
topic
se llama,
by
ese traslado a la nave
Isadora
Terneras, que era sobre
is
armamento.
transferred to Nave Terneras about the abolition of nuclear weapons, and Leona.
Entonces, Leona, la charla de Leona va a ser aquí, ¿vale?
So Leona will speak
Y
here.
nosotros,
Okay.
bueno, para mí, pues, un gusto y
To me, it's
Antonio
proud
Miñoto,
to
que es
be
compañero
here
portugués,
with Antonio Miñoto,
antiguo
a
minero de
Portuguese
Portugal.
comrade.
Él os
He
va
was
a
a miner
explicar
at Portugal
lo que,
Mines.
su vivencia y
He's
las
going
luchas
to
que ha habido
speak
en
about
Portugal,
the
porque
struggles
en la
in
península ibérica
Portugal,
ha habido
because in
minería de
the
uranio. Yo
Spanish
hablaré de lo que
Peninsula
ha
there
sido en
was
España,
uranium mining.
y
I will
Antonio
speak about Spain, and
hablará
Antonio
de
will
lo que
speak
es,
about
la minería en Portugal.
uranium
Yo
mining in
creo que sin más preámbulo,
Portugal.
porque andamos mal
And
de
without
tiempo,
more
teníamos que haber
words,
empezado
we
a las
short
10 y
time
eso a las 10:25.
because
Entonces,
it was
le cedo la palabra a
scheduled at
Antonio y
10.
que los cuente
So
sobre la minería de
the
uranio en
floor
Portugal.
is to Antonio.
Antonio habla portugués,
Antonio
o más portugués que español.
Portuguese or Portuñol.
Él habla más portugués, quiere decir.
Speaks rather Portuñol.
Hablaba muy bien español.
Chico Desiree
Mitad,
spoke
y yo creo que
Nuno
Miñoto
half.
andará como en uno o un poco menos.
Antonio
Así que
is
tenéis que ajustar un poquito
half
el
Portuguese,
oído,
half
¿vale?
Spanish. Okay.
Bom dia.
Good morning.
Portugal, bom dia, Espanha.
In Portuguese
Okay.
and in Spanish.
Vou tentar falar
I'm gonna try to speak
mais fácil,
slowly,
a minha comunicação
and hopefully
mais percebida.
you're gonna understand me.
Então acho que
I think that to speak about uranium in Portugal or in the world
a questão do urânio é igual. Impactos,
is the same. The impacts
toda esta exploração
of all this exploitation in the atomic era.
participou
Portugal participated actively in the exploitation initiated in 1947.
com urânio para a bomba atômica.
Participated with uranium for the atomic bomb.
Queremos quer não, impacto
Portugal had,
na exploração
in
do
any
urânio,
case, an important impact in the uranium exploitation, which was negative
como tem
in
também
the
impacto
atomic evolution,
muito
but
negativo
also a very
na questão da
negative
exploração em
impact
Portugal.
in the exploitation of uranium
A
in
exploração,
Portugal.
como eu disse,
And
em Portugal,
in
Espanha,
Portugal, in
Brasil,
Spain, in
América,
Brazil, in America,
os impactos
the
são
impacts
idênticos.
are identical.
Mandando Mercuri esteve muito ligado a Portugal,
In Portugal, it
com a
was
exploração do rádio,
linked to the
mais tarde,
exploitation of
exploração
radio
do urânio.
and then
era
uranium.
uma amante
It
muito
was
ativa
a
deste mineral.
very
Tanto era tão
important
ativa
site for
e
this
amante
mineral.
gostava que
They really like it
uraníferas
so much that
levava para o
the
seu quarto, que eram
uranium
muito bonitas.
stones were
Tinha uma parte
pretty
verde,
beautiful.
aquele mineral.
The
E Madame
mineral,
Curie, a grande
and Madame
cientista
Curie,
francesa,
the great French
no seu quarto tinha
scientist,
estas pedras que obviamente tinha muita radiação.
would
Mais tarde,
had
Madame
these
Curie
stones that
morre
had
também de
radiation.
câncer.
She then died of cancer because of this.
É a história
This
importante
story is
para percebermos a
important to
importância
understand
como o
the
nuclear
importance of the
está
nuclear
interligado com a exploração do urânio.
is related
Por
to
isso,
the exploitation of
via
uranium.
Portugal,
So
e neste caso a Azul,
in
que
in
para
Portugal,
combatermos o
to
nuclear,
fight the
temos que montante
nuclear,
encerrar,
we have
minas de
to
urânio.
close the uranium
porque uma
mines
coisa
because
está interligada.
they are both
A central
linked to each
precisa
other.
do material,
The
ou
power
seja,
plants needs
urânio
the
para
matter,
funcionar.
the uranium to
Portanto, a
work,
luta
to
é
operate.
importante,
So for the
montante,
struggle
retortilho, e nós, Portugal, dizemos
and
não
in
à
the
exploração do urânio.
retortillo, and in Portugal we say no to
Hoje
uranium exploitation.
é muito
Today
importante em
it is
Portugal,
pretty important
até
in
porque
Portugal
a
even
discutir a exploração
to
do
discuss
para
now
percebermos os
the
impactos.
exploitation of
A história
lithium
em
to
Portugal
perceive the
mostra
impacts. The history in
todas as
Portugal
minas,
shows that all
quer de urânio, quer
mines,
de wolframio,
both of
quer de
uranium
carvão,
and
deixou
wolframium and
impacto muito
coal
negativo na
had a
exploração.
very impact,
E
very
hoje
negative
o
impact.
governo português
And today the
tem muita
Portuguese
dificuldade
government has
para
great
recuperar
difficulties
e
to
aniquilar, acabar
recover
os efeitos
and finish
nefastos
with the
radiação e
negative
a envolvência
consequences,
de
the
toda
radiation
as águas
and
fora
implication and
ligadas à
pollution
mina
of
para
water
acabar com
related
essa
to the
situação
mines to
ruim.
end with that
Minas
situation.
Que mais de 30
Mines
anos
that
continua hoje
for
ainda por
30
resolver.
years are
Uma
still
grande parte
there
já está
and
configurada,
pollution
está
is still
recuperado,
to
está
be
terminado,
solved.
mas ainda é uma pequena parte que não se conseguiu. Como eu disse, mais de 30 anos.
Like I said, it's more than 30
Hoje é
years.
quase
Today,
consensual em Portugal
there is a consensus in
exploração
Portugal
do
that the
urânio
exploitation of
um
uranium was a mistake
económico, social
from the
e
economic,
ambiental.
social and environmental
Económico
point of
porque
view. Economically,
hoje
because
custa muito
today it is
Quer
most
a União
costly
Europeia, quer Portugal, não tem dinheiro
today
para
because
recuperar tão rapidamente como é necessário.
Portugal has
milhões
not money enough to
recuperar, portanto,
recover
em termos
in
económicos,
time because it,
financeiro foi
it
erro.
is very costly
Em termos
financially,
sociais,
but in social from the
deixou
terms,
impacto
it
negativo
left a very
nos
negative
trabalhadores,
impact
mineiros
on
e seus
workers,
familiares,
miners, and the
muita
families,
mortes por câncer.
many dead
Em
people
termos
of
ambientais,
cancer.
deixou
In environmental terms,
66
it left
minas
some
de vários
66
distritos
mines in
regiões
different regions
afetadas
and
pela
districts in
exploração.
Portugal that are affected
isto,
by this
Como
exploitation.
disse inicial,
Like I
começou em
said,
1907 com os franceses
it started
em
in
Portugal a explorar.
1907. The French
Até
started
até
to
2000, ano em que encerra a
search
atividade
for
mineira,
uranium
houve vários
until
países
the year
que se envolveram.
the mines
nos
closed.
interesses
Different
minerais em
countries
Portugal.
were interested in
Mais tarde
minerals in
vieram os
Portugal.
ingleses
Then came the
ligação
English
dos americanos
related to the
para explorar
Americans
rádio e
to
urânio.
look for
Eu vou fazer,
radio
tentar
and
fazer aqui uma
uranium.
explicação
I'm
da evolução.
trying to explain
seus
here
impactos.
the evolution and,
Portanto, estávamos
and its impact.
Em 1907,
I said 1917, in
em
1940,
7 a 40 houve algumas explorações,
there were
nomeadamente na
some
região da Guarda, perto do sul de Espanha,
explorations
em que se explorou
in
urânio.
the Guarda region.
não
They
hoje
looked
isso,
for
Mas em concreto,
uranium
na região de Viseu,
in the
concentrou-se
Viseu
aí a
regions that
exploração de
focus
rádio.
on radium
E os ingleses,
exploitation, and the English needed
para
lots of
trabalhar
people to
naquela
work there
região,
in that
para
region
desenvolver muito
to develop
rapidamente
very
a
quickly
economia
the
e a extração.
economy of
Vieram do
extraction,
país muitos trabalhadores
and many workers
concentraram-se naquela região.
came to work in
Podemos
that
dizer
region. We may say
Naquela
that
década de
in
1940,
1940 there is an evolution, a progress,
saíram das
because
zonas agrícolas
workers
muito menos
left the
remuneradas,
rural
ganhavam muito
areas
menos dinheiro
less developed,
e foram para a mina com melhores
and
condições
to the
do ponto
mines
de
with
vista
better
agrícola para
conditions
mineiro,
from the
ganhando
point of view,
pouquinho mais. Portanto, podia-se
economic
ver
point of view,
que
they were
havia alguma
earning
evolução
more.
muito
So
positiva
you may say
em
that
termos
that was
de
a
sustentabilidade.
positive evolution in terms of sustainability, but
E então começa aqui a Companhia Portuguesa de
then
Rádio
the
em 1940.
Portuguese radio
que
company
termina em
In
1962. Termina em
51, it
1944
ends
até
in
62. São os ingleses que já começaram depois de 40,
1944, and
na
then in
década de
1962
50,
they
urânio
started
em
to
Portugal
explore
e exportar
uranium in
para a
Portugal
Inglaterra
and exported to
contrato
England
com os americanos.
in a
Até
joint venture with the
62,
American.
os
Until
ingleses
62,
exploraram,
the English
então, o
were
urânio, sendo
exploiting
a partir de
uranium,
62, os portugueses,
and
através
then
do
the
Estado
62
português,
were the
explorar
Portuguese
o
with the help
urânio.
of the state, the Portuguese state.
Para más grande, Carlos.
Assim?
Es que decía.
Então? Queda atrás, não sei o quê. Você vê bem? Ok. Como eu estava a informar, nós vimos aqui a
So
evolução,
we see here the
zona
evolution,
onde se instalou
the zone, the site
exploração
where the
e que se
exploitation
retirava
was
o
placed.
concentrado de urânio,
uh,
tanto mineral, passa a concentrado de urânio
There is a
aqui nessas
concentration of
instalações
uranium
que tiveram
in
uma
these
evolução muito
facilities.
positiva.
They had a very
As
positive
terras contaminadas
evolution.
saíam da minas,
The polluted
foram então, como eu disse, havia necessidade
soil,
de concentrar mundo
they
de
wanted
operário,
to
havia da necessidade de
concentrate
construção de casas
all the
para
workers,
esses operários terem melhores
concentration of
condições e
houses
ficarem mais
for
próximos
the
da
workers to
empresa.
have a better condition
E há, por
and
isso, uma
be
certa
close to the
evolução
firm.
de
So
criação
there was a
de
certain
edificação de
evolution of
casas
creation of
para
housing
trabalhadores,
for the
e
workers
questões sociais, como a
and
casa dos
social
trabalhadores,
issues, the house
centro
of
de
the workers,
desporto, inclusive a
sports
INR,
center,
onde passou a ser uma
even
localidade
the national
de
police they
trabalhadores e
had.
famílias. E nasce aqui
And
a
here was
comunidade
born the
mineira da Urgeiriça.
mining community of Urgeiriça.
Nesta altura,
At
começou
this
a ter
point,
cerca de
they
1.500
started
pessoas
to have
só
some
trabalhadoras.
1,500 workers alone.
1.500, 1.300 pessoas. É uma época de grande
It is a period of great prosperity with social
e
costs
humanos muito
and
grandes.
human
As
costs that were
condições
really
eram muito
serious.
difíceis.
Conditions
Não
were
havia
pretty
relações de
hard.
trabalho
There
e direitos.
was no labor
Trabalhavam dentro
relationships,
das minas,
no rights. They would
cerca de
work
500
deep
metros de
into the mine,
profundidade,
some
8 horas sem vir a
500
cima.
meters
Portanto,
underground,
estavam 8 horas, inclusive,
8
faziam
hours
a refeição
work
dentro da mina.
inside with no
Começou-se a
refrigeration.
perceber, então, a morte de
There were
cancro de
many
pulmão,
accidents,
comprovada pelos
working
efeitos da
accidents,
radiação
lung cancer
ionizante.
because of radiation.
Vê-se aqui
You see
uma
here
forma de uma mina no
some
interior e como era a exploração.
snapshots of the
Logo aqui que não há
inside of a
ventilação.
mine. You see there is no
O trabalhador está aqui
ventilation. The workers
desprotegido, não tem máscara,
are
não há informação.
unprotected, no
Porque o
masks,
calor
no
também era
information
muito, porque
because
não havia ventilação
it was
para transformar
really
o ar,
hot
havia mais oxigênio,
because there was
não
no
podiam usar máscara, porque
refrigeration,
senão ficavam ainda
because
mais
otherwise they
abafados.
would asphyxiate.
Mais tarde,
Afterwards,
dá-se a
there was
importância de uma nova evolução.
the importance of a new evolution.
Por dia,
They were
150 toneladas de
exploiting
minério,
some 150 uranium tons, but they had the need to increase that production. So
passou 150
in the
para 300
70s,
de
they
urânio de
reached
minério
some
dia.
300
Como é que isto é
tons
feito?
per
E aqui é que se
day.
vem os
How
grandes
did they do
impactos
this?
negativos.
And now you see here the great
Deixou de
negative
haver
impacts.
exploração
They
interior,
stopped
o método
to
clássico mineiro que desce fundo da mina,
exploit it underground,
a céu
so
aberto.
it was in the
E,
open.
portanto, começou a haver aqui
So,
mais problemas, porque mais
More
rápido
problems
e as
started
partículas
because
começaram a
the
andar ao de
particles
cima,
were
e não era do interior.
emitted
As águas começaram
In the open air, the waters were polluted, the agriculture with the transformation and the use of machines, they would increase the impact. So we see here these mines, you see water, mixing waters, agricultural water and mine water. And to be more yielding, more profitable, the Portuguese state would use the mines that were less profitable. They would leave them there and they would use sulfuric acid to corrode the mineral. So they would introduce a new data, the introduction of sulfuric acid to corrode the mine. So all around the country you would find open air mines because they wanted to have more profits. Some 66 craters throughout the country. The link through the National Uranium Firm reduced the working force to 500 workers. Some 170, we have now data, would die because of cancer, lung cancer that affected these miners. The malignant neoplasias. So they are called. This is a mine, important mine in Portugal, in which you had some 115 miners. That is classical mine. As you can see, they are all equipped, young people. This is, they would have different working periods. These people, I knew them personally. They were young in the 80s. They were around 40 years old. Today, large part of these workers died because of malignant neoplasias. There was sports, they would play sports for the family, for spare time, and this football team that was important because they would represent the Portuguese mines in the football championship. We were champions, we would win always. We were athletes. They would train, they had a coach, they were in good physical shape. Large part of them later would die because of cancer. In 2009, we presented at the Portuguese Congress a memorandum explaining, after organizing different fora with scientists, scholars, politicians, trade unions, a great divulgation work speaking about the impacts of uranium and its malignant effects. It wasn't easy because for the economy of that regions, they would think that would destroy their greatness and development. So the majors, they wanted to keep silent because of tourism.
naquela região
because
não fugirem, não medo
they
orando.
didn't want
Então, alcaides
the people
políticos
escaping
não
that
falarem
area, so
sobre os
the
impactos.
majors and the politicians
Temor
wouldn't
e
speak of the
azul,
impact.
muita dificuldade
So
para
it
expor
was pretty
as suas
difficult
opiniões.
to
E foi preciso
present our
fazer
opinion. So
memorando,
we had to
apresentar
write a
a todos os
memorandum
partidos
to
políticos
present
da
it
Assembleia
to
da
all
República sobre estas
political
causas
parties at the
e sobre os
Portuguese
efeitos.
Congress about the causes
Os
and the
trabalhadores
effects.
mineiros que tiveram um papel
The
ponderante
miners
para
there
desenvolver
had a
em Portugal
leading role
trabalho de
to
recuperação
develop the
daquela zona.
recovery of those
Porque
areas,
As radiações,
because
os
the
efeitos
radiation, the
não vêm
effects,
não se nota.
you don't
impactos
see
é só
them, you
terra,
don't perceive
monte,
them. The
mas não
underground
cheira mal.
effects, they
Então,
don't
para
smell.
zonas, não problema.
So
Vamos ver mais à frente,
for the rest of the
inclusive,
people, there was no
crianças
problem.
numa carretera em
So
que havia muita água, muito
there
azul
was-
vinha, porque não havia
you would
outra
find some
interferência
blue
de outros
water,
resíduos, a tomar banho, a
and
nadar
you would
nessa
see
água,
children
duche,
swimming
crianças que
and
não
bathing
sabiam
in that water, and
pais
those children,
qual
the
era os
parents, they
efeitos.
didn't know
E os
anything
alcaides
about the effects.
políticos,
And the majors, the politicians,
e nós
they
tivemos que
would
avançar
remain
com um
silent.
grande
So
trabalho
with a
junto
great
do
effort,
governo, das populações, denunciando e
we
alertando.
would denounce it on behalf of the government and the citizens,
Ok?
this situation.
E aqui,
And
como se
here,
vê,
as you can see,
várias situações,
you had
entre
different situations.
lume, lareira, em
You
que os
see
trabalhadores
This
faziam
area
esta
in which
lareira, este
the
lume,
workers,
faziam
they
as
would
confecções dele, carne,
they
um
would
pequeno
cook
lanche,
meat,
faziam ali
you see,
nas áreas em que aquela madeira tinha contaminação.
which using
Ao lado
wood that
vimos a
was
agricultura, que
polluted.
era infectada
You would
pelos
have
impactos das
agriculture
partículas.
polluted with
Depois vimos
particles. Then
uma
you
mulher,
see
uma esposa,
a woman,
trabalhadora, com a roupa
a worker's
que a mina
wife
a lavar
with the
junto às
clothes
outras
and
roupas das famílias.
and
E vimos os trabalhadores
washing the workers'
sempre em
clothes
luta.
that were polluted and the workers struggling.
Em 2001,
In 2001,
o governo
the
decreta
government
então que as
decreed
minas tinham que ficar cerradas
the
porque
closure
não havia
of
toda a
mines
abertura para dentro. E então todas as minas tinham
and
que ser
the
confinadas
mines
com
would have to be
segurança que não tinham.
enclosed because of security issues.
Aqui vê-se os mineiros
You
mais uma
can
vez.
see here the
grande
miners
região de
again
Viseu, a
in
fazer
the
uma marcha a
Visão
pé de
region,
24 quilómetros para
organizing,
denunciar e protestarem
holding
e
a
levantarem
march
os seus
to
problemas.
protest, to raise the
Esta já é uma situação
claims.
em que
This is
está-se
a
a
situation in
Antes
this is
era assim,
before
a mina central de
you would
Algeriça,
see the mining of
hoje já se
Jeriza,
vê uma
and
nova
today
evolução da
this is a new
recuperação,
evolution,
tirando
the
os resíduos que
recovery.
estavam ali,
They would-
acumulados, e os efeitos
throw
junto à população que
waste
vivia a 100 metros.
that
Portanto, a
were
mina confinava
dumped close to the population, next to the population, so the workers and the families, they always had great serious impact.
Esta era a zona
This
industrial
is the industrial
onde
zone
quer funcionava
where
a zona de extração,
the extraction
a zona de
site
trabalhadores
was
escritório,
placed.
os
The
técnicos,
technicians, the
todos eles
experts, all
nesta
of them
zona
were
onde se envolvia a
together
atividade mineira.
at this site,
E
this
então isto
operating
leva
mine.
a que todas as
So the
pessoas, todos os
problem was that
trabalhadores,
all those workers
têm morte, todos por
would
cancro.
die
Mineiro,
of cancer,
engenheiro,
the miners, the
administrador,
engineers,
camionista,
the clerks,
mecânico,
the
eletricista,
truck
é
drivers,
transversal a morte por cancro. Porque não é só no
because
fundo que há partículas. Ao de cima,
all the
a transformação,
particles
os
were
caminhões,
in the
as
air,
máquinas, as partículas andam
on the
em
tracks.
circulação e
They were
todos ingeriram.
circulating,
Por
and
isso,
everybody would
desde
inhale
dois
them.
administradores
So
morrem por cancro até outros
2
trabalhadores.
managers would die of cancer, and
Cá
even
está
other
a
workers.
proteção das minas
This is the
que não
protection,
há. Tudo
which is
entra,
no
tudo
real
sai.
protection. Anybody can get in and get out.
Empreiteiros, construção
Even
civil, ia buscar lá terra
some
para fazer habitação.
real estate
Porque era
developers,
fácil. E a terra
constructors
era muito
would
boa, muito
get
fina. Para trabalhar
sand and
noutra construção.
stuff to use it for real estate development.
Isto foi uma jornada muito importante.
This
na
was an
tomada de
important
posse
day
da Comissão Europeia do Porto. Fomos lá,
in
a
the
Comissão Europeia, denunciar esta situação
meeting
de
of
Portugal
the
e
European
da
Commission.
evolução
So we went there to
negativa da
Porto
situação.
to denounce this situation.
Esta importância
This importance of the struggle, workers' struggle, and
leva
this
a que
denounce
vários cientistas e
had the
académicos
effect that
se importem
several
pelo
scientists
tema.
and
E
scholars
em Portugal,
were concerned
vários
about this
académicos
issue,
fizeram
and
teses
some of
de
them
doutoramento
wrote
sobre as questões
PhDs,
do urânio e os seus
thesis
impactos.
about
Foi
the
muito
uranium
positivo
exploitation and its
porque
impact. It was
veio a
pretty
ciência.
positive
As
because
teses de mestrado foram-se incentivando nas
different
questões do urânio.
theses were
Fomos ao
written
Parlamento Europeu.
about
também
this.
ali
We
lutando
went to the
e
European
denunciando.
Parliament struggling and denouncing.
E lançamos,
And
então,
we
depois deste trabalho todo,
publish
mais livro,
a
um
book,
livro que veio dar importância,
a book
que era os mineiros
about,
no trabalho ruim de trabalhar nas minas.
the mining and the
Fizemos
working
recentemente,
conditions
está
there.
aqui,
This
uma reunião
is
com
a
todos os
meeting
grupos
we
parlamentares
organized
de
with
ambiente,
all the
Algeriça, centralizando
parliamentary
na
groups
questão hoje,
about
passado
environmental
todos estes
issues
anos
at
todos,
Algeriça
como é que está a evolução, quer da
to
recuperação
explore
das
this
minas,
evolution
quer das casas habitacionais, que também
of
foram
the
construídas com
recovery of
materiais
the
vindos da mina,
mines,
o
the
que quer dizer que
construction sites in which
diariamente
materials
têm
from the
muita
mines were
radiação
used. So
nessas casas que
still
hoje uma
people
parte
has
está por recuperar.
radiation in their own houses now.
É por isso que nós dizemos
That's
hoje,
why we
e
say
conseguimos
today,
com isto tudo,
and
estes
with
anos
this,
todos, desde 2000
this
até
is
2016,
from
todos os
2000
direitos
to
que tentámos
2016,
lutar.
all the rights we
Primeiro, que
wanted
fosse
to
definida a recuperação
get
ambiental
back,
de todas as minas. Foi
we
conseguido.
wanted the
Segundo,
environmental
que todos os
recovery of these
trabalhadores
sites.
fosse dado
We
pelo Estado
wanted all
direito a ser acompanhado
workers
medicamente para ver a evolução,
having
já que foi dito
medical
que os nossos
attention
mineiros
about their
estávamos contaminados. Então
illnesses
foi
because it was
aprovado
proved that
programa
we
de
were
saúde para os
polluted,
mineiros
so
fazer
a
exames todos os
program
anos.
was approved,
Terceiro,
a health program
que
for the
todos os
workers.
trabalhadores fossem
We
considerados para
obtained
efeitos da reforma
the
da seção
acknowledgement
como
that
trabalhadores
all
perigosos
workers
e terem direito
should
a
be
2 anos mais
recognized as
Quarto e último,
workers under
indemnização
dangerous
a
condition,
todos os familiares que
and also
morreram de
compensation
trabalhadores com
to all the families
Foi
with dead
importante isto, conclusão em
people because of
2016,
cancer. So in
final, face à
2016,
situação política, em
this
que
was the
houve
conclusion.
partidos que estiveram sempre nesta luta,
All the
com o novo governo,
political
em que sai das
parties
eleições de
involved in
2016,
this struggle after the 2016
transforma-se
2015
por unanimidade
elections.
aprovar
They
que os trabalhadores,
passed
as famílias
a
têm direito à
decree
indemnização. Por último,
in which
veio o
compensation
governo e a
was
Assembleia da República
given to these
fazer
families,
uma homenagem
and
pública
they organized
aos
also a
mineiros
public
e assumir o
homage
Estado
to the
que foi
workers, to the
cúmplice
miners,
e que foi
and declared
culpado
that the
desta
state
situação
was
de
guilty
contaminação.
and accomplice of this
Hoje nós, mineiros,
situation, pollution
luchamos
situation.
já não virar de página. Entendemos que
we
esta
as
parte para
miners,
trás de 18 anos de
we
luta
want to look
obrigou a uma nova
forward.
dinâmica. Queremos
This
um museu
forces us to a new dynamic. We want a state museum in which this story should be told with videos, with old devices, and a narration of the whole story. We have technical commissions, scientifically working to study all these conditions about the health situation. We understand as minors that this life is infinite. The causes and prejudices and biases are endless. New cases show up, so we think that the uranium exploitation is a mistake that belongs to the past in Portugal, in Spain, and everywhere. It's no progress at all. It provokes great problems for humanity, for anybody involved. So that's why we say that in defense of fundamental rights, this struggle must go on and will be there together, because new cases are going to show up. We still don't know. We still don't know all the problems in the families. The effects it will have on generations is still to be analyzed, but there is a true fact. This is a situation, and the negative consequences will be there forever, and the exploitation of lithium in Europe and in Portugal is also very negative in comparison with the open mines left in Portugal, with a negative impact on landscape and on development. So we think that they should be closed, and a new attitude, a new position should be adopted with regards to the planet and humanity. Thank you.
Bueno, la situación es dramática, ¿eh? Teníamos que acabar a las 11.
The situation is dramatic. We have to finish at 11. I'm going to explain a little bit about this. It's not the paper route I gave to the translator, but I will be ready to answer any question about it. In Spain it was different. It was at the beginning of the 20th century in Spain. It started to look for uranium after the 40s and 50s in Portugal, but in Spain it was about searching for the atom bomb. We have had nuclear power plants that they don't have in Portugal. In Spain, after the death of Franco, they were still looking for the atom bomb. The problem is not just the mining, but also the concentration plants. In Spain, there were some 3 plants, Andújar, Jaén, and Badajoz, and Salices El Chico in Salamanca. We are a citizens' platform struggling against the mines they want to open in Salamanca. El Retortillo is the most famous, and also in the so-called 7th zone in Salamanca. So they want to open them. We have another problem here, that we have a nuclear fuel plant. Once the fuel is enriched, they manufacture them this. If we finish with the nuclear plants, we wouldn't need mines. The problem we had, Leona explained to us yesterday, once they open the hole, they fill in with whatever they want. El Cabril, the nuclear dam with low and middle waste, it was a uranium mine.
Donde meter basura radiactiva está metida en la AVA.
in lava, they put any nuclear garbage in Salices. In Salamanca, they're spending millions for the recovery of a land you cannot access to. The problem of the treatment of the mineral is that this is a waste. This is a nuclear shade that will be there for generations, and this is against intergenerational justice. The decisions made now because of greed and because of corruption in Spain, the corruption we have in Spain, this implies that some firms obtain profit and have the permits to develop these projects that have negative consequences. In Retortillo, they got money, the municipality, to facilitate the opening of the mine. Also in Badajoz, there were corruption cases. There is a mine of a treatment plant. José Manuel Soria awarded the permission. Berkeley is their firm, is an European firm, so the permission was given because of Arias Cañete, because a lobbyist, Lamela, talked to him. So the power of the nuclear lobby is linked to corruption, and the consequences is that we have mining projects in Salamanca, also in Badajoz, and it's pretty important the help of the Portuguese comrades, because they have come to our protest, and we are really thankful to him, because the mine is 30 kilometers away from Portugal. If a disaster would happen, some floodings or whatever, 30 kilometers away from Portugal, all nuclear shit would go to Portugal from El Retortillo. Sorry for being so fast. You may ask some questions. I'm sorry I couldn't read the text. Are there any questions or remarks? Raquel?
Bueno, las presentaciones del... No, pero habla díselo tú, solamente es eso. ¿Tú en inglés lo podrás decir? A Raquel, no, bueno, que lo digas, sino que simplemente la presentación para traducir.
Sí, puedo, pero lo hago mucho peor que en español. Le doy que la petición... Ahora ya. Esto vale para todas las ponencias y las
This is for all your presentations. Please could you send them to all participants, because they are pretty interesting. My question for you is, today, which is the situation with this Berkeley firm from the legal, technical point of view? This week, it's been even published because they really were high in the stock market, but I don't think it's going to go on. The uranium price, when this started, is some 140. Today is $24. It's not profitable, but they are speculating. They got permissions, but they are in the courts. That permission by José Manuel Soria, we expect it to be cancelled, to be refused. They have a construction permission, authorization that we have denounced in the court. So they don't have permission, they just want to speculate, and we expect it not to go on, but we must be vigilant, keep vigilant, and we want this nightmare to end as soon as possible. They they even open the road and the coexistence among us, because there are people that want to mine, so there is a civil distress because of this. It's not to be open, but the harm is already done. Sorry, Hipólito, we must end because we are 25 minutes late already. So thank you. Sorry to stop like this. So, and now Leona Morgan will speak here because we have changed side, because here we have the simultaneous translation. So thank you.
Good morning. I will start in just a couple minutes.
Voy a empezar en unos minutos.
So no adapter. No adapter. It's okay. It's okay. I just would like, but it's okay if it's not.
Thank you.
Bueno, como vamos con mucho retraso,
We're going to try and be here till 11:30. If there's any questions, do them there, because afterwards we will only have 15 minutes. Now we had to change, as Habibi told you, we had to change the program. We were meant to have Isadora talking about nuclear weapons. We changed it because in the other place we didn't have simultaneous translation, and here we do have the service. So Leona Morgan is going to speak now, only speaks English, so we decided to change it. So we're going to have Leona with history of nuclear impacts in Isla Tortuga. Leona Morgan is an activist and an organizer of indigenous communities. She has been struggling in the United States since 2007, and she's focused in the production of new uranium extracts and radioactive waste. She co-founded the Nuclear Issues Study Group in the United States, which is a grassroots organization founded in 2006 to protect New Mexico from nuclear waste. Thank you.
Good morning.
Buenos días.
Because of the issue with time, I want to talk about the things that people are interested in hearing. I can do a presentation that will take a long time and speak about many things, but I think maybe some of you have very specific questions, so instead of going through my slides, I'd like to have more of a discussion. I have some slides to show, yes, many pictures that are good images to give you an idea of the impacts to indigenous people in the United States. But before I begin, I know this is not a formal process, but I would like to take a couple questions, or maybe someone that is here who really has a specific interest on the impacts to indigenous peoples of North America. I would like to try to address those first instead of my normal presentation. Is there a specific thing in Spain that people want to hear about? Okay, we have one. Okay.
Sí. Uno.
Here.
Aquí.
Hello, good morning.
Buenos días.
My question is related to water.
Con
la pregunta en inglés, la traduzco brevemente después al español. I work with people along the Tagus River in Spain, and one of the concerns is especially related to Central de Almaraz and the risks downwater from Almaraz, especially in Portugal. I'm not totally, but I'm very, very ignorant, and one of the reasons why I'm here is to understand better the contamination issue related to the water. I don't know, the government, the authorities say that nothing is happening, that everything is under control, and out of my ignorance, where do I start? Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe one or two more topics.
¿Hay alguna otra pregunta?
Okay. If there is no other suggestion, I will begin and focus a lot on the contamination of water. Please forgive me, I'm moving my slides to the computer here. I'm just wondering how many were here last evening, because I did begin a talk already, and I just want to get an idea how many people were here. Okay, maybe I should ask how many people were not here last night, so this is new information. Okay, gracias. Okay, so my beginning introduction is always in my language. So I will speak in my language. Yate abena, she Leona Morgan yinshke, torich ini nishle tanabtli bashichin kia ani deshiche toglini dashanella. So I just introduced myself by my clans. Traditionally, as Indigenous people, it's very important that we introduce who we are according to our traditional system. So I said first, what is my mother's clan? And it is a water clan. So traditionally, my people, we operate in the system we call G'e. So G'e means like family, and it's a traditional structure to organize and to relate to one another. My second clan is, so I said Twadijini, that's bitter water. Tsinabithni is Sleeping Rock, that's my father. Kia'ani is Towering House, this is my mother's father. And then Tohaglini is where the waters come together. It's my father's clan. So this is like an area of a confluence. So it explains where I come from, traditionally, my ancestors. And it's really interesting because the clans also give an idea about your role in society. So there were 4 clans. Traditionally, a long time ago, our people had these 4 clans, and 2 of my clans are from the original 4. So this is a kind of a leadership clan, and my first clan, my mother's clan, is also as a teacher clan. But because I have 2 water clans, I feel like it is my role to work on water and to protect the water. So I will start my presentation, but I just also wanted to give an introduction to myself and how I came into this work. In 2007, I had, this is when the time the price of uranium went up very quickly, and in the United States, there was this idea, the industry and the government promoted, that was called a nuclear renaissance. And so this is a time when all the old mining companies, they already owned land and minerals. They call them their in-place mineral resources, which means this is their money, but it's still underground. And so they came, they wanted to start mining again, and so one of the issues is we live in the desert, and the uranium, the mining that they wanted to do is, it would be it would use so much water, and we already are in a place with little water. And so the way I started is fighting to protect the lands where my family is from. So I will skip some of these slides. In 2006 and 2007, like I said, the price of uranium went up, and this is when I learned about the project we call Hydro Resources Incorporated, HRI. Later, the company changed its name to URI, Uranium Resources Incorporated, and they wanted to do what's called in-situ leach mining. In-situ leach mining is a type of process where they inject some chemical solution into the aquifer. They inject it into the earth to extract uranium through a process of pumping in this solution of water and chemicals that will loosen the uranium underground, and then they pump the chemicals. The chemicals will attract the uranium. Well, they will make the uranium mobile in the earth. So right now, uranium that is in the earth, it's not moving around. And so when they would pump in the chemicals, it would loosen the uranium so that it could become mobile. And then they would pump up a lot of water to catch that uranium. And this is a process they call in-situ leach mining. So the water that had uranium in it they would then dry it as much as they could and then put it in barrels and drive it. The project we were fighting was here in Church Rock area. This is okay. So last night I spoke about the Church Rock spill. If you can see this map, this is the border of New Mexico and Arizona. There's a town, a small city called Gallup. This is so if you look on a map, you can find the place I'm talking about. It is small and it will not be on the map, but Gallup will be on the map. So the spill that happened in 1979 was about right here. No, I'm sorry. It was right here. And the project, the community I will speak about lives here. And the project I was fighting was about here. They wanted to take the uranium out of the ground using this in situ leach mining process and then drive it in a truck on this little road to this community in Church Rock. So I apologize, the arrow is not correct. This point, it should be here. Crown Point, New Mexico is the place where my family lives, and this is the place where they wanted to process the uranium. And this is what I was most concerned about, because my dad is from this place here, and my mom is from here. So my aunties and cousins and family live in this town of Crown Point, and the water is very pristine and pure, and it's very clean, good water. But what they wanted to do is use that water to process the uranium that came from Church Rock. And so in order to do this type of mining, the company has to deliberately contaminate the water. So in order to get uranium, they have to contaminate the water. And here in Church Rock, this is where they wanted to extract the uranium. And in order to do this type of mining, the company needs a permit, which is called an aquifer exemption. This means they got permission from the United States Environmental Protection Agency to contaminate this part of the aquifer. So they have a permit. It's the shape of their land. This section is 160 acres. I'm sorry, I don't know in hectares. But the idea is this part of the aquifer, if this is the land and you go straight into the earth, that little section of water would be exempt from the federal drinking water standards and different water laws. So the company has this permit that they can contaminate just this part of the aquifer forever. And there is no renewal. Once they get this type of permit, they can use it forever. And that means that the water will always be contaminated with uranium. The good thing is we stopped this project. So this type of in situ leach mining, it happens in the United States, in Texas, and also in the South Dakota area. And so ISL mining is very, very bad for the water. You can never fix this problem once you start any type of process like this. After the company uses the area, see, what they say is the uranium will stay in this section of their property, that the contamination will not go outside of the company's private property. And they are pumping, and it keeps the water contained for the time they are pumping, but once they stop, and then the groundwater will start to move, Mother Nature will take control again, and then the contamination will move outside of their private property. So this gives you an idea if these brown shapes are the rocks and the uranium is stuck to the rock. After they pump in the chemicals, the uranium is then loose, it's separated from the rock and can flow through the water. So this is just to respond to your question about the contamination to water. This is not happening in my community, but it is happening in places in the United States and other places in the world. And This is the area that I was speaking about in Church Rock, and this is the area where the community lives. This is the most contaminated area, and the community that lives there, they are still living there, and part of the being an indigenous person, we will not leave our land if we don't have to. So even though the people live between two mines and near an old uranium mill that is closed, they will not leave because this is our home. So as indigenous people, we stay where our families are from, and like for me right now, I live in the city, but one day I will move back to where my grandparents lived, and this is where I hope to grow old, and eventually this is where I will die. This is just part of being an indigenous person. Some people say, well, if your land is contaminated and your water is contaminated, why don't you move? This is not normal for indigenous people to go to other places. As I spoke about last night with colonization, this was maybe part of the culture of Western European people to go and to take land. And there is a document called the Doctrine of Discovery, which was basically created in the church in the 15th century. It was basically the permission. It was a paper document that says God gave permission to people to go and take land from other people, and that they are not human. This is the beginning of colonization, and this is a document that is still used today to justify the taking of our land, our water, uranium, and other resources. And so it is a very hard thing to try to change this document. It is so old, but this is the same document that was used all over the world to colonize lands. And as many of you know, that Spain colonized New Mexico. And so we have many indigenous people in New Mexico. My people, we are Diné. We are related to the Apache, and we are related to some other native people in northern Canada, and our language is very similar. But in New Mexico, we have what's called the Pueblos, and there's 19 Pueblos, 20 Pueblos in New Mexico. 19 in New Mexico and 1 in Arizona, who are the Hopi. And these native people, they have a similar way of living, that they live together in a community, and so they have these old communities in New Mexico with the old architecture. They still live there today, and some of these communities, they all had Spanish names. So the Spanish did very bad things to these people, and today there is a movement to reclaim their own name, their language, their culture. So the Pueblos were very good at retaining their culture, even though the Spanish had come. There's a very famous story called the Pueblo Revolt, where in the 1680, there was a leader named Popé from the Pueblo, from San Juan Pueblo, and he organized a revolt against the Spanish. And so at all of the pueblos, there were the mission with the Catholic priests who was that was in charge and controlling the people. This was the time when there was still the genocide and the trying to remove the people from the land, and the Pueblo people, they did not want this anymore. So what they did, they organized, and in 1680, they had runners go from this pueblo to run to all the other pueblos in the state, hundreds of miles or hundreds of kilometers. And on the same day, they all killed the Catholic priests at each of the pueblos. And the Pueblo people, they retook their land, and they were successful to kill all of the Spanish people who had come in to try to take their land. And this was successful, but only for 12 years. And then after that, the Spanish came back much, much harder with more force and then killed and then did what they had to do to retake the area in New Mexico. So this is I don't know how many of you have heard of this revolt. It's called the Pueblo Revolt. Are you aware of this? Yes, this is a very, very, very important part of New Mexico history, and Pope is seen as a hero, a great leader, and they organized this before the internet, before Facebook, and with no cars, no horses. This, to me, is a true community organizer. Amazing, amazing story. And so this is just some of the history, but moving to today, one of the pueblos is the Pueblo of Laguna. This is a map you can look on the internet, and on Google Maps you can go to most of these places and zoom in very close and see the impact of uranium mining. This is the world's largest open pit uranium mine. You can see how big it is. Here is the mine. The mining company came in and they started to mine in the area where the farming land was for this community. So the people who were living there, this is the desert, so there's not a lot of water, and so when there is a place that has water, it is very important and very special, because we say water is life. And if there is a source of water, the people, they use it for drinking, for their animals, and for farming. And what happened is the uranium company started the mine in the farming area, and that became contaminated. And when they couldn't find any more uranium, they just kept getting bigger and bigger until it took this huge space. And the community lives here still today, across just very close to the mine. And so when the wind blows, you can see some of the structures here. You can see some of the houses. And all of this is, they say it's cleaned up. So there was some reclamation, but what happens when you have a mine where the companies say they took out the contaminated soil and then they bring in new soil. This is supposed to be a way to clean, but they take out the most nutrient part of the earth, and so plants, when they bring in the new soil, I don't know where it's from, but plants will not grow there anymore. So you can see here, these are all little trees and vegetation, but over here, there are no plants. And so there's nothing to hold the soil, and so the dust, the radioactive dust, it continues to blow into the people's homes today. And of course, there are many issues with cancers and different health problems. Last night I spoke about Mount Taylor. This is one of our sacred places and a very important place for us. In this community of Redwater Pond Road, this is in Church Rock. The Church Rock community, as I mentioned, is one of the most contaminated in the country, and so this is the homes of the people. You can see the green and the plants around the homes, but after they did the cleanup, the same thing happened. It was just a lot of dirt, and when the rain came, the rain also washes away the new dirt because there's no place to put it. I'm going to just go to show some more pictures, and I don't want to take too much time because I know we are already behind on the schedule, and I think there's many things I would like to share, but because there is not a lot of time, I will just explain one more issue, that is some of the impacts to indigenous people in the United States right now. There is a fight that I am a part of. We call this fight Hall No. Hall No is it doesn't make sense when you translate it into another language, but in some of the earlier movements for social justice in the civil rights movement, there was a saying. People would say "hell no," This is a term in English. "Hell no" is a kind of a response to authority, and so it's a type of protest in itself to say "hell no." But a hall is a transport. So I know it's kind of funny, but maybe it doesn't translate. So Hall No is the name of our fight. This is a fight against the transport of uranium. There is the Grand Canyon here in Arizona. Arizona is in the southwestern part of the United States. So here's Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. The borders of these states it makes a straight intersection, and we call it the Four Corners. So this region we call the Four Corners, and we also call the bigger area the Southwest. So this fight is in the indigenous lands of the Havasupai. That's the tribe that lives at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Wallapai is another tribe, the Hopi, and my people, the Dine. And then also other tribes such as Paiute, indigenous peoples, and Ute people. There's several different Ute tribes as well, and then some Apache. So if people ask, when we talk about the United States or we talk about impacts to indigenous lands, the entire United States and of course the entire North America and South America were all indigenous lands before colonization. So we still can maintain, we still say this is our land. The United States might be there. You have these new imaginary lines with the four corners. You have the border at Mexico, but this is a new thing that we as Native people find very frustrating, because our people, we lived here with no lines, but now these lines determine laws, government, politics, and of course extractive industries coming in to capitalize on the lands in our areas, and they utilize the modern government and the modern laws to their advantage, and the laws are written for the advantage of corporations and to extract. Our government as a Navajo Nation was created in the beginning only to sign a contract for coal mining. So this was necessary that the companies needed an entity to have a legal document, because our people did not organize in this way. We had our clan system and our traditional way, but now we have what is called the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Nation or government. So now all of the tribes have some Western type of government system. And so in this fight, the people of the Grand Canyon, the indigenous people, they lived at the Grand Canyon, at the bottom of the canyon, and they used also the top of the canyon. There are over 2,000 uranium mining claims around the Grand Canyon area. In 2012, this area was protected by a 20-year moratorium or 20-year ban, stop to uranium mining. So the Grand Canyon is seen as a special place, not because it's a special place to Native people, but this is a very beautiful part of the American landscape that is now a national park. People like to hike there. It's very famous, for tourists. This protection was not for us as Native people. It was for the tourist economy and, as we say, the environmental movement. So for me as a Native person, I am not an environmentalist. I do not consider myself an environmentalist. I work on these issues because the land is part of our history and it is part of our culture, and as Native people, we do not see ourselves as separate from the land. It is our mother, this is our home, and it is not a fight to go and hike, but it is a fight to protect the land itself and the sacred entities that live there. There are beings, there are things that are part of the land that are not human that we are also trying to protect, such as water and other parts of our culture. So anyways, the canyon mine area, the Grand Canyon area has 2,000 mining claims. They are not allowed to mine for 20 years, but there are about a dozen mining claims that can continue. we call it they are grandfathered in, that they can continue even though this protection exists. And just recently, the president, the Trump administration, is trying to get rid of this ban. So now there is a law in Congress, or new proposed law they want to pass to make this protection permanent. So it will protect the Grand Canyon, however, it will not stop the mining of these, this small group of mines. And so Canyon Mine is here. This is a uranium mine. There's a shaft that they already dug the shaft. And in at the Grand Canyon, the way the water, the natural system for the water is that the canyon, the canyon walls are like this. There are springs that come out of the layers of the earth. And at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, these springs are used by the Havasupai people for spiritual purposes. And so their concern is if the mining is happening up here, that the springs where the water comes out will contaminate the water down below. And so this is an issue for their people. It's always been an issue. And so this fight is about stopping the canyon mine, but the problem is the company, Energy Fuels, it owns the only uranium mill here. It's in Utah. This is the last uranium mill in the United States. The same company owns the mill, which is 3 miles away from the Ute Mountain Ute community. So the indigenous people there, they don't like the dust from the mill blowing into their homes, and they also have health problems. It's a very dry area. It's a similar situation that I described in the previous slide. And so this red line is where the trucks will take the uranium. The trucks will be covered only with tarps. So it will be a big truck with the uranium ore and only a cover on the top. And then they want to drive it here to process. Our Navajo Nation government has a law that says no transportation of any radioactive materials. And this red line here, this transport, is all on a state road, a little bit of a city road. The law for our nation does not have jurisdiction over the state or federal highways. So even though we have this law for the protection of our people, the company can still transport uranium. So this is a big fight that we have, and as indigenous peoples, we're fighting the mine at one end, the mill at another end, and in the middle, we are concerned about any transport. And when we started this fight, I talked to my government, the Navajo Nation, and I said, this is uranium, it's a big problem. Everybody knows the bad things about uranium and what happened to our people, but then I started to explain, we are now dealing with the transport of high-level radioactive waste from nuclear power plants that could go through the reservation on the railroads. Again, our people cannot stop the trains because this is a federal jurisdiction. And I explained to my tribe that high-level radioactive waste from nuclear power plants is the most dangerous, most toxic waste, more than uranium. And yet today, there has been nothing done on the high-level transport. So now these are some pictures. I will just end by showing you some of the slides from an educational tour we did. So Hall No, our organization, our small group, we traveled from the mill. We did a talk to the community about this company, the proposal. We gave them all the information about the dangers and the risks, and we stopped at different communities, starting at the mill, and then we went to the mine, and we had a big action with all of the native people. Here we are doing a radioactive readings at the mill. This is the Ute Mountain Ute people in Utah. They said a uranium truck or some truck. See, the mill takes uranium and it will process the ore to make yellow cake, but the mill only has a permit to store waste on the mill site that is from the mill. So the permission for the company is the waste on their property can only be from the mill. So instead of focusing just on uranium, because there's not much uranium mining happening now because the price is so low, it's not so profitable, the mill takes nuclear waste from other places in the country and they process it through the mill to try to take the uranium out. And this is not to make money on that small amount of uranium, but it is actually just a way to store waste for other companies, because this is a better way to make money, is for them to hold the waste from other sites. So this was the big gathering that we had. This is at the Grand Canyon, and so these are all the native people that I mentioned, the Havasupai, there's Hualapai, there's Hopi folks, Diné people, Ute people, and then we have some Pueblo folks all together, and this is part of the work that we do to organize, is to continue to practice our cultures. And so the Havasupai people, like I said, they use the area around the Grand Canyon, and they used to have they continue to have a traditional gathering, and so we were invited, all of us came to join the Havasupai in their traditional event. And this is for the protection of their water and their land, and also, you know, for the health of their community and the future generations. So I will stop there and hope there is, I don't know if there's any time, but that's my talk. So I would like to say thank you for everyone to come and listen to me today.
Charla hoy y os agradezco mucho haberme venido a escuchar hoy.
Gracias. Ahora sí tenéis alguna.
Thank you. If you get any question.
Una.
Sí, funciona esto. Simplemente,
Just what kind of compensation you think for the Diné people, the people working there, have they been compensated? Antonio Miñoto spoke of Portugal workers receiving some compensation, not in Spain. In Andújar, there was a concentrating products factory. Only 20 people remain alive, and families haven't been given anything. In Salices, the same. They say the cancers are because of smoke or whatever, not because of uranium. Has the Diné people been compensated?
No, of course not.
Por supuesto que no.
This is a question, I guess, that could, there's many answers. So there is the contamination to the land. The Navajo Nation is one of the only places that is getting some kind of cleanup from the federal government. And so our Navajo Nation has what's called a 5-year cleanup plan. And so the federal government is working in these 5-year periods to clean. On our land, they have identified 523 abandoned uranium mines. And so they put in maybe a few $100 million to do this cleanup. And there are 2 places that they say are cleaned up. One is in Church Rock, which is not cleaned up, and then another one is in the Monument Valley area. And so if you compare this to Wismut in Germany, I think the annual budget there is about 100 million euros a year, about. So 100 million euros every year is much more than what is being done in the United States. And so this is very poor compensation for the contamination to the land. When we talk about water, water is a sacred entity. You cannot put a price on a life, and the same as water. We cannot put a price on something, the earth itself. We, as Native people, this concept of capitalization or ownership of land it never existed before. So today it's impossible to say this is how much you owe for the water. This is just one example, but also for the workers. In the United States, we have this law. It is called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. We say RECA for short. RECA is for the compensation to mine workers before 1971. This includes people who worked at the mine, people who worked at the mill, and transporters. This does not include people who worked at the mill who were not miners. So if there was a cleaner, a janitor, secretary, other mine workers who were not miners, they are not compensated. But nonetheless, they also are subject to the exposure to radiation and also have health impacts. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act will give about $150,000 for one-time compensation, and you can apply again in the future. In order to get this compensation, you have to prove your birth. You have to have papers to say you are an American citizen. You have to have your pay stub. So if a miner today got sick and he wants to get this compensation, maybe he does not have his paperwork from the 1950s to the 70s to say he worked at the mine. And the problem with us as a Native people, a lot of our parents, so my mom and dad, and many of the older generation, they were born at home. They were not born in a hospital. They do not have birth certificates. And so for them to have this paperwork, the birth certificate and the old pay stubs, the old paychecks from the company, if you don't have them, you do not get the compensation. And so many of the mine workers said this is a very racist law, that the request for compensation to Native people is much less. A very small percentage is given compared to the white population. So RECA, it covers the mine workers before 1971. It covers downwinders from the Nevada test site, or people that were at the test site of any U.S. testing. So this compensation only goes to certain people. However, it does not include the people downwind from the Trinity site, and it does not include people who worked at the mine after 1971, or the people living around the mine. So the compensation is not enough. And yes, this is to answer your question. I can probably speak some more. There is a law now in Congress to try to change it, but it never goes through. It never is approved.
Now we're going to have there's another question, but sorry, we're behind schedule, so we need a coffee pause because it's a long journey today. What's the time now?
Vale, pues tenemos hasta las 12 para un
Until
pequeño break y
noon,
tomar un café
we have
o,
a time for a
descansar un
break,
poquito porque es que
have
la
a
jornada
coffee
acaba
and
casi
rest
de
for a
empezar y va
while
a ser
because
larga.
we just
Gracias.
began and this is a long, long day. Thank you.
Vale, podéis ir a la nave Terneras.
You can go to the
¿Sabéis
nave
dónde está la nave Terneras?
Terneras.
Que está
You
ahí
know where
detrás.
it is?
Podéis ir a la